How you doing? Today, let's talk about chord changes, particularly changing from one chord to another chord smoothly. Back when I started learning how to play and I had learned my first handful of chords, probably like a C and a G and a D chord, I noticed something very frustrating in the initial stages. Being able to go from one chord to another sometimes was left with a giant gap and a space between the chords. In other words, I was not able to connect them smoothly. And the advice I was given back then was, well, just keep going between the chords and eventually, they're going to get smoother. Another more astute suggestion was, look for common fingers. Like when you go from a G chord to a D chord, you'll notice that there's a common finger that you don't have to lift, and that'll help speed up the chord changes. And that seemed helpful enough as well. But what it really came down to, I discovered later, was that the reason for a space between chords, or a gap, is that the chord you're about to go to is probably not fully developed in your muscle memory yet. So let's take a look at how you can actually fix that in the most effective way without wasting any time that the other methods inevitably have you do. So the first thing you want to do is to double check to see how well you actually know that chord. Let's take, for example, I'm going to just do two chords here. Let's do C major 7 and A minor 7. Now, it doesn't matter which two chords it is. In your situation, it might be going from C to a G. Honestly, it doesn't matter. What you want to do, though, is test how well you know chord number 1. So, here's the test. Can you instantly form the chord without going through what I call the assembly process? In other words, we're trying to gauge whether you're still in the assembly process phase. So if you can do this, then you own that chord now. If you still have to form the chord one note at a time, that is telling you that's why the chord changes are slow. If the other chord you're going to is instant, like the A minor 7 here, then that chord is probably fine. So let's take a look at what you can do to take chords that are in the assembly phase and get them to the point where they're instant. Form the chord one time and take as much time as you need to get it right. We're already in the assembly phase anyway, so we might as well just be patient with it. But what you do is you form the chord, give it a strum, and then here's the interesting part. Remove your hand and put it on your knee. That's right. Take it completely off the guitar and hit the reset button, so to speak, by just taking your hand off and placing it on your knee, nowhere near the guitar. Why is this important? Because what we're going to do now is repeat that. We're going to form the chord again, give it a single strum, remove. Every time you go to reform the chord, you're telling the brain, I want this, this is important to me. If you only do it a couple of times, the brain goes, okay, that's cute, and then it erases that data and saves room for other stuff. By forming the chord, removing your hand, and doing this over and over and over again, you are reiterating the importance of that chord to your muscle memory. Now, what I would do to get this to happen much sooner, I would do this with a timer, not a metronome, but with a timer. Set a timer, like an egg timer or something, for 3 to 5 minutes, let's say. How many times could you form a chord in 3 or 5 minutes? Let's say 5 minutes. How many times? A lot, right? You could probably form one chord quite a few times. If you take the other approach that people commonly refer to and keep going between the chords, let's say there's 3 chords, C major 7, A minor 7, and an F major 7. If you keep going between the 3 chords, you're only touching upon the problem chord once every 3 times. How many that you're going to get 1/3 of the time of your practice time actually dedicated to the problem chord. So our approach here is to, with a concentrated amount of time, let's say, again, 5 minutes, 1 chord, and repeat this process. And I think what you're going to find is, after about 10 to 15 repetitions of this, you're going to start to see certain fingers hone in on their strings and frets almost instantly. So instead of it being one, then another, then another, then another, you're going to start to see maybe these two come in right away. They found their home, and then the other two straggle in a little late. That's okay. If you can observe that, you are observing progress. You are seeing things start to take hold here. Here's another approach that you want to avoid as well. Forming the chord one time, and let's say it's not great. Couple notes. People do this all the time. I see this where they try to move their fingers, and they'll do this for 5 minutes. They'll actually form the chord only one time, and then they try to adjust it over and over again. How many times did they actually form that chord in 5 minutes? 1. Not nearly enough. We need to form it thousands of times in order for it to become an automatic impulse. That's really what you want to do. I did that with this chord. This is also a C major 7. Now, if you look at that, that looks rather grueling. And it was. When I first learned this chord, it was terribly grueling. In fact, it was a complete accident. I just put my fingers in a weird spot, and I played it, and I went, oh, it actually sounds pretty good. Figured it out, and realized it's also a C major 7 with E in the bass instead of C, which is why it has a kind of a darker, more melancholy vibe to it than this one. This one's a little sweeter, softer sounding, right? Anyway, this was a great experiment. Could I take this weird, unorthodox chord shape that, you know, most people run away from? Could I get it to the point where it became instant? So I used this chord as my experiment. So if you want to try this for yourself, 5th string, 7th fret, E, use your middle finger. 4th string, 9th fret, B, use your pinky. 3rd string, 5th fret, with your index finger. That'll be your C. And then the G will be the 2nd string, 8th fret, with your ring finger. This would be a great example of a chord that you could not really expect to get very quickly, but try this experiment. Do this for several days in a row. And what you're going to find is over time, you get much quicker results with being able to form that chord instantly. Now, that seems like an almost crazy way of approaching it, like sitting there for 5 minutes and just doing this over and over and over again. It seems kind of insane. But if you think about it, the number of repetitions you get in one sitting in 5 minutes, which is almost nothing, would far exceed what a normal player would rather do. They would rather maybe form it a couple times, grunt and scream at it, give up on it, move on and play something else. And eventually, maybe after months, they finally get the chord, because then they finally have put in enough repetition. Let's get you there sooner. Let's get you there in days as opposed to weeks and months, right? So form, drop, form it, drop. That's it. Seems simple, and it is. But this is the most effective way to get your chord changes happening. It's worked for myself, obviously, and pretty much all the students that I've had that have complained about, you know, kind of sloppy, slow chord changes. And every one of them have said, you know what, I never actually thought about that. That makes so much sense, to just focus on one chord and not focus on the chord in the sense of adjusting it like this all the time, but literally reforming it and then removing. And I think you're going to find that the results for you will be the same as I had, and looking forward to it. So hit me up in the comments when you get a chance, and I will see you in the next one.